question of one struggling for existence. In this connection, the commentary by Sripad Madhvacharya, who quotes from the Tantra Bhagavat, is very meaningful. Sat Shabda Uttamam Bruyad Anandantit Vaivadet Yati Jnanam Samuddishtam Purnananda Drishistataha Atravatcha Tadadanat Satyatya Chocyate Vibhu. Explaining the words Satyasya Yonim, Srila Viswanath Chakravarti Thakura says that Krishna is the avatari, the origin of all incarnations. All incarnations are the absolute truth. Yet, the Supreme Personality of Godhead Krishna is the origin of all incarnations. Deeparchireva hi dasantaram abhyupetya deepayate. There may be many lamps, all equal in power, yet there is a first lamp, a second lamp, a third lamp, and so on. Similarly, there are many incarnations who are compared to lamps, but the first lamp, the original personality of Godhead, is Krishna. Govindam Adipurusham Tamaham Bhajami. The demigods must offer worship in obedience to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but one might argue that since the Supreme Godhead was within the womb of Devaki, he was also coming in a material body. Why then should he be worshipped? Why should one make a distinction between an ordinary living entity and the Supreme Personality of Godhead? These questions are answered in the following verses. Just sense the wonderful transcendental Bhakti Vedanta purport. Om Ajnanatimmirandhasya Jnananjanashalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Presthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. So today is a precursor, a class for preparing our consciousness to welcome the Supreme Lord for Janmashtami. And as many of us, we eagerly anticipate and participate in Janmashtami festival, it is important to know who the Supreme Lord Krishna is, why does he appear, and what are the significance and the specialities of his activities. Actually, a class of 40-45 minutes is not enough to understand who the Supreme Absolute Truth is, what is his position, and how we can really understand. But some points taking from the authorities might help us in our understanding of who the Supreme Lord is and how should we celebrate Janmashtami. So this verse is spoken by the Ananya. Who's speaking this verse? By the demigods. The demigods, when they saw that Mother Devaki is very bright, she has become very beautiful, they all realized, including Kamsa, that the Supreme Lord has now entered into the womb of Mother Devaki. And they have come and they are offering this wonderful prayers. The first word that is used is Satyavratam. If you see this verse, it is filled with the word Satya. Satyavratam Satyaparam Trisatyam Satyasya Yonim Nihitam Cha Satye Satyasya Satyam Ritasatya Netram Satyatmakam Tvam Sharanam Prapannaha. It's a very beautiful verse and very powerful purport which Prabhupada is explaining. What is this absolute truth all about? The first word that is used is Satyavratam, and this is spoken by the demigods, where they're saying Krishna always keeps his words. Krishna always keeps his promises. So what are the promises that Krishna makes in Bhagavad Gita? Prabhupada quotes few in the purport. Okay, paritranaya sadhunam vinasaya cha duskritam dharma samsthapanarthaya sambhavami yoge yoge. What else? Kaunteya pratijanihi name bhakta pranashyati. He gives this promise or the assurance or this vow that my devotees will never perish. Kaunteya pratijanihi name bhakta pranashyati. Also in the 18th chapter 66 verse, which we often quote, sarvadharman parityajya mamekam sharanam braja aham tvam sarva papebhya mokshayishyami ma sucha. People lack faith in these words of Krishna. But this verse is spoken by the demigods. And the first word that they are using is Satyavratam. Satyavratam means the Lord always keeps his vow. We are not just relying on some person who is showing up today, tomorrow he'll not be there. So that's why each word in this is very important. Satyavratam. So if somebody surrenders to Krishna, the absolute truth, then he gives that promise that he will take care of, he will protect him. In fact, the verse that Madhav quoted, paritranaya sadhunam vinasaya cha duskritam, it says that there are some people who are evils or who are duskritam, and there are some people who are devotees. Often when this statement is made, people have questions or doubts, so-called those broad-minded people who say, why are you saying there is good and bad? Why should we discriminate? Actually, we don't need to be philosophical. We can ourselves know that there are people who are duskritams and there are people who are devotees. This doesn't require a philosophical speculation or a conclusion to come to that kind of understanding that there are two kinds of people who live in this world. But there are often these broad-minded people who question and who do not allow us to come to the conclusion that there is a supreme absolute truth. In fact, when Prabhupada established this ISKCON in 1966, that time when Prabhupada coined this word International Society for Krishna Consciousness, the so-called broad-minded people were saying that it should be International Society for God Consciousness, ISKCON. It would have been, instead of ISKCON, it should have been ISKCON or whatever, ISGCON. But Prabhupada was very, very clear. Prabhupada was very strong in saying that it is International Society for Krishna Consciousness. Sometimes when we speak to people, even we try not to speak the supreme absolute truth in a non-compromising manner. We compromise it. We say, no, if you take up to this process, maybe you will get some relief in terms of, your stress will go down, your concentration will improve. All those things we say to people. We often don't speak the absolute truth the way it should be spoken. But Prabhupada was very non-compromising. And this is what is needed. Unless that is there, everything appears to be true. This God is also there, that God is also there, tomorrow somebody else will come. And if we don't have the clarity of vision, everything appears to be the same. But that is why demigods are emphatically saying here, who should be worshipped and why should he be worshipped? Satyavratam, Satyaparam, Trisatyam. Satyaparam, he is the supreme absolute truth. And Prabhupada quotes Satyam Param Dhimai, the first verse of Srimad Bhagavatam, to explain why the Supreme Lord Krishna is Param Satyam. Trisatyam, he is true, or the truth appears both, not both, in all three phases of time, which is past, present and future. Satyasya yonim nihitam cha satye, satyasya satyam rita satya netram, satyatmakam tvam saranam prapanna. Ultimately they are saying we should surrender to this supreme absolute truth. The word that is used is prapannaha. The first question when you ask people to surrender to someone, there is a huge challenge inside. Surrender? Why should I surrender? I am so capable, I have got my own strength, intelligence, and I can do my things. I am in control of things. Why should I surrender? To understand this, very interestingly, if we see around our life, if we see some real life incidents, we can see how helpless we are and how there are different layers of controller in our lives. I'll give you a simple example which I have told many times. Once I was studying in the Bangalore ashram in the room, and there was a small insect which was crawling in the table next to the book that I was studying. was a very tiny insect, so I kept my pen over there where the insect was trying to move. So the insect tried to go from this side, from that side. He realized that this is a big problem for him. Right? A pen probably is something which he cannot fathom. So it was trying to go from this side and that side. Whichever side he was going, I was just trying to put that pen over there. So his movement was restricted. His movement was obstructed. So then it appeared as if it is motionless, dead. Right? So it remained there for some time. So that I should leave him or something. But the moment again it started moving, I put my pen over there. Right? So for the tiny little insect, a human being may appear like a big controller. He doesn't have the power to, counter this kind of the strength of a human being. Now change the equation. Imagine if you are an insect in the hands of someone. The way you are trying to control the insect, if somebody else is controlling us like that, quite possible actually. And those are the demigods. Imagine, you are walking on a street and there is some demigod who's the controller of electricity or something. He realized that probably, there is no lightning or something, and he does something and the lightning falls on you. You may question, why me? How is it possible that, I have been a victim of these things? But he's just doing his duty. But in the course of his duty, maybe a small, tiny human being is just of, insignificant consequence. Like that, there are different layers of controllers. There are different layers of truth. The truth that we see in our eyes is not the absolute truth. There is an absolute truth which exists, and that absolute truth is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. It's a very wonderful realization when somebody understands that who the Supreme Lord Krishna is, what is his position, and what is the benefit of surrendering to him. Satyatmakam tvam saranam prapanna. When we surrender to the Supreme Lord Krishna, we are fearless. The position of fearlessness comes by surrendering to the Supreme Lord. Now, to further understand this is a beautiful verse. The reason I read this purport, even if you're not understanding anything out of the class, nothing, zero, doesn't matter. At least you remember the verse and you can go back and read this verse. Read the purport, how the Supreme Lord is the Supreme Absolute Truth. Many people say, well, Krishna is our worshipable deity from childhood. हम तो भगवान का मतलब लड्डू गोपाल के साथ खेलते हैं, this kind of things. These are all very sentimental things. Somebody can say, well, for you Krishna is the Supreme Lord, for me it is Shiva. Somebody may say Krishniva, whatever that boy's name is. Or somebody may say Ganesha. But to understand the Supreme Absolute Truth factually, from the point of view of the scriptures, through the eyes of our acharyas, we need to go and really see this to understand who the Supreme Lord is. And that Siddhanta boliye chitta na kare alas, iha hoite chitta lage sudrudha manas. When we get this philosophical conclusions, understand who the Supreme Lord is, what is his positions, as beautifully explained in this purport, our philosophical conviction to practice this process becomes very strong. I want to go to a little further and explain, because we have very little time, and I want all of you to remember one verse which we will chant, and the beauty of the verse, and how should we prepare our consciousness. First, we need to understand our situation in the material world. It's a very precarious situation which Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, all the scriptures very nicely they explain. What is our situation in this material world? Often the color, the glitch, the glamour, the attraction, the temptation of this material world are so overpowering that we forget our helpless, precarious, very distressful situations. We just are completely forgetful of our precarious situation. The scriptures, they talk about a very nice example, the example of a frog who is there in a water, and this water is slowly boiled. The temperature is raised gradually. Imagine if the frog is put in a water and the water is boiled gradually. So the frog is thinking he is enjoying, and he's trying to adjust, and that the act of adjustment is nothing but called the conditioning, where he's trying to get himself conditioned to this environment. And very soon, before he realizes, the temperature becomes so hot that he dies in this pot. If the frog is put into a hot water, the water in which he died, just one moment if he is put, it will jump out of it. But just because this is gradual, he thinks that there is some kind of enjoyment, I can adjust, I can get used to, and then he lives in that, and ultimately he dies. This is exactly what is our situation in this material world. We don't get all the miseries at once. We don't get all the difficulties, the griefs all at one time. It comes once in a while. In between the miseries there are little happiness, which makes us believe that I can adjust. I can somehow make my, I can change my environment in such a way that I can be happy in this world no matter what. And that is where, finally death comes and snatches away everything from us. This is what is our precarious position. Very interestingly, I thought I'll just touch upon this prayer by Prahlad Maharaj. Prahlad Maharaj's instruction in Bhagavatam. So he says, this is in the 7th canto, 6th chapter, 11th to 13th verse. He talks about how the exact, whatever the analogy I gave about the frog in the water, he puts it in a beautiful verse. Katham priyaya anukampitaya sangam rahasyam ruchirams mantran suhrut sutat sneha sita sishunam kalaksharanam anurakta chitta katham priyaya anukampitaya. He says, how do people get entangled in this material world? Katham priyaya anukampitaya. So he says, often people, they look for someone who can talk in a very pleasing voice. I look for that one, for a man it's a girl, for a girl it's a man. Katham priyaya anukampitaya. There'll be one lady, there'll be one girl who will, talk to me in a very pleasing manner, having compassion on me. Sangam rahasyam ruchirams mantran. In some private solitary place, he will talk to me, she will talk to me so pleasing that I will get attracted. And that attraction is the beginning of our entanglement. And once we are attracted to that other person, the person of opposite sex, then what happens? Suhrut sutat sneha sita sishunam kalaksharanam anurakta chitta. Then slowly, when those two people come together, they think that we should have children. Unless we have children and we have affection for them, what is the use of being together? So they think of having children. What happens when they have children? Putran smaramsta duhitru hridaya bhratrun swasrurba pitarau chadino grihan manogru parichadamscha brittischa kulya pasuvritya vargan. Then once you have children, then you think of those children. You keep remembering them. Putran smarams ta duhitru hridaya. And in your heart, you're always thinking of your children, your wife or your husband. Bhratran swasrurcha pitarau chadino. And instead of doing chintan about the Lord, the mind is occupied with chinta about bhratran, swasrur, father-in-law, pitaro, of your father, mother, all these people you keep thinking about it. Not just that, because of this attachment, now I am thinking so much about my family members. This may appear like why these verses are spoken. Mind you, this verse was spoken 1 lakh years back. Prahlad Maharaj was telling. Still the mentality of the people don't change. Even those days people were having the same mentality. And even 5,000 years back when Krishna was present, he was also, seeing and similar kind of things. These are actual words meant to awaken us. These are not meant to, say that, okay, actually everybody in this material world suffers. Whether you are a grahastha, whether you are a brahmachari, whether whoever it is, nobody is spared. There are different kinds of challenges everybody faces. The fact is, when we accept the supreme absolute truth, when we accept what the truth is, then we make progress in the right direction. Otherwise, we make progress in a direction where we are constantly getting entangled, where we are trying to solve the problem only to get entangled more and more. So Prahlad Maharaj is telling, not just your father, father-in-law, mother-in-law, Putran smaramscha duhitra hridaya, not just your son and daughter, you get attached to even small articles in your house. Grihan manogrihu parichadamscha vrittischa kulya pasubhritya vargan. Even small articles, small objects, pasu, some animals, the dynasty in which you are born, the occupation that you have, and the money that you are earning. Everything you get attached to. Then he gives a very powerful analogy. That analogy is this one. Do you know what is this? Huh? Verse is here. Tyajeta koshas krid ibehemanaha karmani lobhad avitripta kamaha aupasthya jaivam bahubahyamana katham brajeta duranta moha. Somebody is saying, yeah, who's that? Silkworm. Silkworm is the right answer. So silkworm, when it makes this cocoon, it actually gets entrapped in that. And this is what Prahlad Maharaj is telling. Tyajeta koshas krid ibeha manaha karmani lobhad avitrapta kamaha. Tyajeta koshas, this silkworm is weaving, it's making that cocoon without realizing that one day it gets trapped in that. Tyajeta koshas krid ibeha manaha karmani lobhad avitrapta kamaha. Avitrapta. Kamaha, this desires are always unfulfilled. Unfulfilled desires, and there is karmani lobhat. Lot of work we are doing because there is a greed. And there are unfulfilled desires and we are working very hard. Aupasthya jaivam, and we are only worried about two things, our belly and the genitals. We are trying to satisfy that. Where to eat nice food and where we can have some sex. Aupasthya jaivam bahumanyamanaha katham virajye taduranta moha. This illusion is so strong, so powerful that everybody gets entrapped in this. Katham virajyeta duranta moha. This is what Prahlad Maharaj says, the beautiful translation. How can a person who is most affectionate to his family, the core of his heart being always filled with their pictures, give up their association? Specifically, a wife is always very kind and sympathetic and always pleases her husband in a solitary place. Who could give up the association of such a dear and affectionate wife? Small children talk in broken language, very pleasing to hear, and their affectionate father always thinks of their sweet words. How could he give up their association? One's elderly parents and one's sons and daughters are also very dear. A daughter is especially dear to her father, and while living at her husband's house, she is always in his mind. Who could give up that association? Aside from this, in household affairs, there are many decorated items of household furniture. There are also animals and servants. Who could give up such comforts? The attached householder is like a silkworm, which weaves a cocoon in which it becomes imprisoned, unable to get out, simply for that satisfaction of two important senses, the genitals and the tongue. One who is bound by material conditions. How can one escape? Why does one do this, and how does one get into this? That is also very nicely given by one of the verses which is spoken by Kapila Dev in third canto. He says, Yam yam artham upadatte dukkhena sukha hetave tam tam dhunoti bhagavan puman shochati yatkrite. Actually, why people are working hard to earn money? Yam yam artham upadatte dukkhena sukha hetave. They want to counter the miseries. There is some misery which is going on in their life and they want to counter so that they can experience happiness. For that reason they are working hard. They are earning money. Yam yam artham upadatte dukkhena sukha hetave tam tam dhunoti bhagavan puman shochati yatkrite. And that very endeavor, that very means by which we want to become happy and earn money is dhunoti, that is destroyed by the Lord. Puman shochati yatkrite. And a person becomes morose. He laments. Whatever is produced by the materialist with great pain and labor for so-called happiness, the Supreme Personality as the time factor destroys. And for this reason, the conditioned soul laments. Puman sochati yatkrite. Now, having heard this, and if you just hear that Bhagavatam is talking about some picture or it is telling about the miseries and not giving solution, then what is the point reading this? What is the point, following this path if it is just talking about some very glim picture of ours, which has got no hope, it's a bleak thing, and there is no hope for this. That is not the case. Actually, the solution which Bhagavatam gives is very powerful. What is the solution that Bhagavatam gives? Let's understand, let's hear this verse, and let us try to memorize this. Ashesha sanklesha samam vidhatte. Ashesha sanklesha samam vidhatte. Gunanuvada shravanam murare. Kimba punastat charanaravindha. Paraga seva ratiratma labdha. We'll chant 2 more times. Asesha sanklesha samam vidhatte. Gunanuvada shravanam murare. Kimba punastat charanaravindha. Paraga seva ratiratma labdha. Ashesha sanklesha samam vidhatte. Gunanuvada shravanam murare. Kimba punastat charanaravindha. Paraga seva ratiratma labdha. So this verse, it says, Asesha sanklesha samam vidhatte. Asesha, unlimited miseries. Asesha sanklesha samam, all of them together. Vidhatte, it comes to a cessation, it comes to an end. How? Gunanuvada shravanam murare. Yeah, you can chant. Gunanuvada shravanam murare. Murari is the name of the Lord Krishna who killed the demon Mura. That's why his name is Murari. Gunanuvada shravanam murare. If we get a chance to hear, actually the process of hearing is so powerful. We may neglect it. We may often ignore it. But that is the most important process to revive our consciousness, to bring back our consciousness to its original state. Often I say in Bhagavatam class, when the speaker sits and closes his eyes and says, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, the Shrota is also going to sleep. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, so the eyes are also closed. And then this is the sleeping mantra in Bhagavatam, in ISKCON, and the waking up mantra is Mahaprasade Govinde Namo Brahmane Vaishnave. Everybody is ready, ho gaya, time ho gaya, we have to go. Actually, there is a story. This I've heard from one of the other sampradayas, or Sri Vaishnava Sampradaya. One person, he was talking. When Lord Ram killed Kumbhakarna, you know who was wife of Kumbhakarna? Wife of Ravana, everybody knows probably. Mandodari. The wife of Kumbhakarna is Nidra Devi herself. Okay. And when Kumbhakarna was getting killed, he prayed to Lord Ram. When he was killed, his wife came and prayed to Lord Ram, saying that now my husband is killed. What is the best advice? What is it that you? Please give me some shelter. Please ensure that I am protected. So Lord Ram told, okay, you should do one thing. You should always be present wherever there is a spiritual discourse which is going on. So that is why you find, whenever there is a Bhagavatam Katha, everything else is fine. But when the Bhagavatam speaker starts, 99% of the people go to sleep because Nidra Devi is personally present. She is very loyal to the instructions of Lord Ram, and she comes and attends every discourse. So our mind is so distracted, where we are actually supposed to pay attention to these verses, to these words of Srimad Bhagavatam. These are not my words. These are not words of any speaker. They can awaken that dormant Krishna consciousness. They can bring up that, actually it is there. The Lord is always there in our heart, but He has to manifest. The word manifest means He is there, It is just that we don't have the right environment. We are not cognizant, or we are not aware of His presence. How do we make that, how do we perceive the presence of the Lord? Shravanadi Suddha Chitte Karaya Uday. When we start the process of devotional service, starting with hearing, Shravanadi Suddha Chitta. Chitta becomes Suddha Karaya Uday. And here it is mentioned, Asesha Sanklesha Samam Vidhati. You may have thousands of miseries, thousands of difficult things. The example which Prabhupada gives in the purport is like a traveler who's traveling far and wide, going through all different, deserts and this thing, finally comes and takes a cool shower. Like that, Asesha Sanklesha Samam Vidhatte Gunanuvada Shravanam Murare. When we hear the glories, the qualities of the Lord, Gunanuvada Shravana Murare, it is like a cooling shower. All these miseries, all the problems that we have, it'll vanish. So when we hear, as it is mentioned here, when we start hearing Gunanuvada Shravana Murare, gradually we will develop an attraction for doing devotional service. Asesha Sanklesha Samam Vidhatte Gunanuvada Shravanam Murare Kimva Punastat Charnaravinda Paraga Seva Ratiratma Labdha. You often see when people are struggling in their devotional service, when they are not fixed, when they are finding it difficult, or when they are finding it as burdensome, two reasons. Either they are not chanting properly, or they are not hearing sufficiently. If these two things are neglected, if the chanting and hearing is not proper, the attraction, the rati for the devotional service will gradually diminish. The rati, or to be engaged in devotional service, will increase proportionately to the amount of chanting and hearing. That if our chanting is very good, we are hearing properly, and we are hearing regularly Bhagavatam, then it happens. So the time that we have, it's already 9 o'clock. I would say that if you have not read at least the first few chapters of Krishna book, please read. Please read and understand who the Supreme Lord is. What is His position? Prabhupada says, when Parikshit Maharaj was hearing this from the mouth of Sukadev Goswami, 3.5 days, 3 days and 3 nights were gone before he finished all the first 9 cantos. And then he was worried, he was concerned that whether Parikshit is really hearing or not. Imagine, if I continue for another 10 to 15 minutes. Anyway, children first, they start going. They keep going. After that, people also will see what's going on today. 9:30, we have to go for prasadam. But he was not eating, he was not drinking, he was not even sleeping. You may somehow overcome eating. Okay, some fasting. Today is Ekadashi, Janmashtami, what to do? Fasting. People will forcefully, they will sit, they will hear. More difficult than eating is drinking. He's not even drinking. More difficult than eating and drinking is not even sleeping. Imagine if you don't have to, here itself, I was telling 10 minutes, 15 minutes, people start sleeping, dozing off. And if it is mentioned that there is no prasadam, half of the people will go away. But he's not. And he's constantly hearing. And when Sukadev Goswami asked him, are you there? He actually finished the entire Krishna pastime in 2 verses. Just 2 verses, everything is over. And suddenly Parikshit says, what are you doing? I've been waiting all these days. I've been waiting eagerly to hear this. And don't think that I am starving. Actually, I'm hearing the nectar of Harikatha from your mouth, which is satisfying my hunger, thirst, and my sleep. So that nectar of Harikatha, to appreciate that, even if it is not appreciable now, we should take it as a medicine. That's what Prabhupada writes in the first page of Krishna book. Nivritta tarsher upagiyamanat bhavo sodhacho manobhiramat. Nivritta tarsher upagiyamanat. When somebody is free from all desires and hankerings, he can naturally be engaged and he'll have a relish and taste for hearing Krishna Gatha. Maybe we are not there in that stage. Doesn't matter. We should still take this as a medicine. Bhavo sodhachotra manobhiramat. And this medicine, the moment we hear about a medicine, we think it's bitter. It's not something pleasant. But this is manobhirama. This is very pleasurable. This is a very nice, sweet medicine. Bhavo sodha chotra manobhirama ka uttama shloka gunanuvada. What is the last line? Puman birajyeta vinapasugnat. Puman birajyeta. Only a killer of his own self, Puman Virajyata Vinapasugnath, who is a killer of his own self, will not be interested in doing this, because this medicine can give us relief, can give us the the remedy from coming out of the cycle of birth and death. Who will not be interested in this? And such a nice process. So I would recommend that read this Krishna book, at least the first few chapters, the advent of Krishna, and how beautifully Prabhupada explains. There are many intricacies, there are many subtle truths in this, and the more we read and the more we hear, the more we will relish this thing. The more we will understand how we can perceive the Lord who is present in our heart as Paramatma directly, how we can understand the manifestation of the Lord in our heart. So on this auspicious day of Janmashtami, when we are preparing our consciousness to welcome the Lord, let us pray. Let us pray that we can actually directly perceive the Lord. And as Prabhupada in the purport towards the end of the verse that we were talking, the demigod's prayers, he mentions about this thing. The challenge is, like I was telling, that this may be difficult for some of us to read, to hear, to chant. This is all difficult. But whether you want to take this difficulty for this life, and that ensures eternal life of happiness, bliss in the Vaikuntha, or you want to avoid this and take the path of the so-called comfortable path, the beaten path, and take eternal life of bondage. The choice is yours, and the choice we have to make it consciously. If we take up this austerity of actually developing a taste, it is very relishable, and that will free us from this material world. I'll stop here and see if you have any questions or comments. It's a good question. So basically, having that goal in our mind, the clarity that this is not a ritual, being very conscious of my selfish, like my self benefit, which is really ultimately beneficial for me, and knowing that my time in this material world is very limited. Like Prabhupada says, not that death is sure. It is not that death can come anytime. Death can come the next moment. We don't know. So when that thing is always there in our mind, then even if it is little austere, it makes us more careful and cautious. The cautiousness or the carefulness comes by remembering the impermanence of our life. It's only when we feel complacent, we feel confident, I'm in control of whole things, that is where all these problems come. The taste goes away, the eagerness goes away. So to answer to your question, remembering that impermanence of our life, and keeping the goal in mind, that my goal in this life is to go back home, back to Godhead, that will help one to become serious. A. And B is, as Rupa Goswami mentions, Ado Shraddha Ata Sadhu Sangha Tata Bhajana Kriya Ata Anartha Nivriti Syat Tata Nishtha. So Ado Shraddha, you may, to come to that stage of Nishtha, it is not that always you will be struggling. So the previous things have to happen very clearly, very strongly. Shraddha Tata Sadhu Sangha, association with devotees who are serious, who are taking this matter seriously. Associating with them, you get the inspiration. Tata Bhajana Kriya, and following the rules and regulations given by the Acharya. If we do that, like following the 4 regulative principles, chanting 16 rounds very strictly, associating with devotees, then anarthas will go and we will naturally develop a taste. It takes time. It takes time, but for sure it develops. Like that example of jaundice patient. At the beginning stage, even the sweet things appear bitter. But if you keep on eating, tatha anudinam, if you keep on doing that every day, regularly, then it's a matter of time when you will develop a taste, and the disease also will be eradicated from the root. So consistently associating with devotees, remembering those things, one can overcome. It's not that it's not possible. No, because she asked, now my husband is no more, what is the best thing that I can do? So if she is present and hearing, that means, that's the best thing she can do. it is for her the best thing, right? And when she is present, the impact is on us. Of course, it is meant in a lighter way, that she's the most chaste. I mean, she's always present wherever there is a Bhagavatam discourse. Doesn't mean that there are sadhakas who are serious who are also not present. I mean, they are also there, like all the sages, including Parikshit Maharaj. They were also hearing and they were very attentive. Not that only Parikshit was hearing and others were eating and sleeping, and they were also in the same stage. They were also not eating, they were also not drinking, they were also not sleeping. So whenever there is a serious sadhaka who is present, then this is the influence of Nidra Devi is not there. But in general, she is present in this audience where there are people who go into sleep. Mhm. Makes one person calm and all, and then he becomes sleep. That is true at the beginning. That is true at the beginning when somebody is going through a lot of disturbances, lot of anartha, lot of challenges, like mind is disturbed. When somebody is chanting, so you see the person who is chanting at the beginning, he falls asleep. It's a very common thing to see that people fall asleep while chanting, or you get drowsy and all. But as you become sincere, you realize that you are wasting your time in the sleep. Nidra hara vijito, right? That is the verse which the Sat Goswami Ashtakam it is mentioned. They minimize the bodily necessities. First thing is Nidra. Nidra is actually the sign of mode of ignorance. So, and that makes us always, there is a tug of war where the ignorance wants to prevail, wants to make us go away. This is the comfortable path. This is what I should do. So we have to overcome this by coming to the mode of goodness, by that sincerity, by that determination, and by praying, of course. So even though the transcendental sound is penetrating and making us feel sleepy, it's not that we are supposed to sleep. In the beginning, it is okay, but the power really lies in hearing. Very powerful.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, I have one question.
Mm.
You said distractions, the material distractions lead to forgetfulness of our precarious situation in this material world. So, the primary and the most convenient activity to do to
Get rid
just
of this
to
distractions.
start from the starting point.
Primary is Shravanam. Like yesterday, last class I was mentioning, Shrinvataha Swakatha Krishna, Punya Shravana Kirtana. No, Shrinvataha Shraddhaya Nityam, Granatascha Socheshtitam, Kalena Nati Dirghena, Bhagavan Visate Hridi. Shrinvataha Shraddhaya Nityam. When we hear with earnestness, Shraddhaya, and regularly. Prabhupada writes regularly, comma, always. You may hear regularly means, regularly every Sunday. But always. Shrinvataha Shraddhaya Nityam Grinatascha Socheshtitam, and taking this matter seriously. It is not a casual discussion, okay, it's some kind of a ritual that I'll go and attend and then I'll get going with my life. Taking the matter seriously. What is it that is discussed? What is the supreme absolute truth? These are not some ordinary things. They are very, very, the sages, the yogis, the jnanis, they are working really hard to understand this. When something is given very nicely in a palatable way, we don't appreciate the value so much. That big purport that I read, I don't know how much we could grasp, but we should go back and read it again. How Prabhupada is establishing who the supreme absolute truth is. And mind you, those demigods are using Satyam, 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 Satyam. Every line there is Satyam. They are not some bogus people, they are not some foolish people that they don't have words to fill. That's why they are using only word Satyam. There is a reason. So when we see this, taking the matter, Grinatascha Cheshtitam, Kalena Nati Dirghena Bhagavan Vishat. The Lord becomes manifest in our heart. The word Prabhupada uses is not, Vishate actually means enters, but the Lord becomes manifest without a lot of time. Immediately the Lord can manifest. So if we create opportunities for hearing with earnestness and Shrinvataha Shraddhaya Nityam, regularly and always, taking the matter seriously. Kalena Nati Dirghena Bhagavan Visate. So to get rid of the distractions, the more you hear, the more you get, you develop a, um, say, detachment from this material topics. Otherwise, this material world is filled with topics to entice our mind. What is that verse which Sukadev Goswami says in the beginning? Second canto, first. What is that first line? Shrotavyadini Rajendra Nrinam Santi Sahasrasha Apasyatam Atma Tattvam Griheshu Grih. There are thousands and thousands of topics which people are talking and discussing. Shrotavyadini Rajendra Nrinam Santi Sahasrasha. Some sport, some weather. Today weather is good. You see the whole day people will be talking about that, right? Or something happened, somebody won, or some election. What is the Indian candidate who's standing for the presidential thing? What is his name? Ramaswamy. So all these things will keep on, people keep on talking about that. Shrota Vyadini Rajendra Nrinam Santi Sahasrata. Why? Apashyatam Atma Tattvam. Because they're not realizing the truth of self, that busy talking about these things. When one is conscious about that, his topic of discussion will be different. He will be paying attention. So if no other questions, we'll stop here. Granthra Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Srila Prabhupada